Welcome everyone to our next webinar here at AIM Sports. This one is this is our 190th of the series since we started doing these back in 2020. The when we March of 2020 is when we, I think, last week of March in 2020. This is our sixth year of starting these. This is our second one of our sixth season. We've been having such a great time with these, and get to chat with a lot of cool people and learn a lot of things, and pass along a lot of information to a lot of folks. And today's is going to be no different. We're going to talk a little bit about racer fitness and data. There's nobody better to talk about that with us than Trey. Trey has been an AIM employee in the past. He understands data real well. He's a racer in karting and works at PitFit and manages the is it Charlotte or Concord, I think.
We call it Charlotte. We're actually up in Cornelius by
Cornelius. That's what I remember seeing that now.
But we just refer to it as Charlotte since we're in the Charlotte area.
It's the greater Charlotte area, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So Trey's going to join us today. A little bit about Trey, and I'll let him talk a little bit about himself as well. There he is on the left there on that screen, where he's a little bit cold. It looks like he's got his driver's suit on and his old AIM jacket on, getting ready to go out in the cold maybe. Trey has an odd thing he considers to be fun, where he does 24-hour kart races, and he does them solo. Can you believe that? And I think you told me you had done like 5 or 6 or something attempts at the world record, and I think you still hold it, right?
No, I don't think I hold it anymore, but yeah, I've done 7 of them overall. 7 on indoor tracks, outdoor tracks, record attempts, and also like actual races. So yeah, I don't know if I necessarily consider it fun anymore. I haven't done one in a while. I had no plans to do any more at this point. So yeah, 7 seemed like a good number, and focusing on other things now.
I was thinking to myself, I'm getting older now. I don't stay up for 24 hours very well anymore, let alone be that active. I used to be an off-road racer, and we'd do desert races. And I think the longest race I was ever in that I drove solo was 10 hours and 400 miles, and it was out in the desert of outside of Las Vegas, and that was. I was wore out at that, and it was only 10 hours. I can't even believe you can do that. So, but Trey's here to join us and talk a little bit about this. We're not going to go over each one of these right now, but Trey is going to chat about a little bit about these topics, biometrics and fitness and motorsports, and then we're going to we got a few data slides we'll look at as Trey talks a little bit about these. But why do you want to know what your heart rate is? What does all that mean? There is Trey trains a lot of people at PitFit, and not only from the racer side, but the pit crews and all sorts of folks, karting and NASCAR and IndyCar, and the pro versus the amateur. A lot of the folks that are here listening to this are going to be more at that amateur level, obviously, and then we've got some young folks and old folks. I'd like to chat a little bit about that, and how much is thinking about the heart rate and the biometrics and all all of that. How much is that a part of the overall training plan? And then we'll get into some more of the deeper stuff on there. I think what we'll do is we'll turn off the screen share, and then you and I will just kind of chat with each other here for a little bit, and talk about these topics right here, just to kind of get ourselves going. So let's do that. I think that did that. I don't have my second monitor running here today, so I can't see exactly what is happening. But let's talk a little bit, Trey, about why do we need to know? Why do we need to know what our heart rate is while we're in the race vehicle, and how does that tie in together with an overall training plan that you're such a big part of?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few reasons we'd want to see what that is and know what our heart rate is while we're in the car. Ultimately, we do want it to be a little bit elevated from its baseline, because that shows that we are, essentially up to the task. We're doing something that is physically taxing, and it should be something that elicits some level of arousal from the brain, and as a result, it should elicit a little bit of a higher heart rate. But the biggest thing is we want to make sure it's not getting too high. And what it can what having that trace shows us is where are we in that window of our performance, and are we maintaining a are we staying in the window we want to be in so that we have some in reserve to use when it's necessary, or is the driver becoming too fatigued? And unfortunately, the point at which our cognitive capacities start to become diminished, that happens before we start feeling fatigue, before the onset of the feeling of fatigue. But we can use heart rate to tell if that point is coming and if we're getting closer and closer to our lactate threshold. So it gives us a lot of good indications as to what performance could be in the immediate future that we may not be able to sense ourselves.
Do you run that the same whether or not you're um, the question was pro versus amateur. Do you run that the same, pro versus amateur, young versus old? Is it the same basic concepts, but you just take different levels, or how do you mix between all these different groups that you may work
Yeah,
with?
yeah, it is very similar. Honestly, in terms of what the levels should be, it's not necessarily a difference between pro and amateur. It's just everybody's going to have a slightly different baseline, not by much, but slightly different. We'll do everything based off of what an individual's maximum heart rate is. So we look at more of a percentage of their maximum heart rate as opposed to like specific heart rate numbers. Um, and then the biggest things we see with pro and amateur is not necessarily one having a higher heart rate than the other. Typically, an amateur's heart rate may be a little higher than a pro's, but it's usually from a it'll be from a little bit of an increase of physical demand that they may not be as ready for, but also cognitive demand. So a a professional driver tends to be more what we call ahead of the car, right? And all of their actions inside the car are more anticipatory than reactive, whereas an amateur driver with lesser experience may have a little bit more of reactive movements inside the car. And what that does is it not only elicits a slightly higher heart rate, but it also moves when that heart rate rises as well. And we can get into that a little bit more later because it's actually pretty interesting. Some of the things that we found over the last couple of years with pros versus amateurs in that respect.
Yeah, interesting. We've all seen, video, the NASCAR and IndyCar. Sometimes they'll have the heart rates and temperatures and some other things as part of their onboard video, right? Or some sort of a little screen or something. And you'll see some of the drivers, they're all very much professionals, right? But then some of them are, they'll slide through a wreck and their heart rate will go up like 10 beats or something, right? And then there's another guy that is just as skilled and just as experienced, and the heart rate was already way up, and then there's these huge spikes that every time they're in a corner or around
Mm-hmm.
another car or something. Do you see that? Is that pretty typical? And that's across, obviously, then that, if that's true for the professional, that would be true for the amateur as well, I suppose, right?
Yeah, and I mean, even at the professional level, that's something where we see a huge variation. You might have some guys, like you said, that their heart rate just doesn't spike that often. And it's just the nature of their physiology. Whereas we have some drivers that they need to be able to operate at 170, 180 beats per minute because that's what their heart rate does when they're in the car, whether it's from nerves or cognitive load or a combination of those. It is very individualized from one driver to another, and even with the most experienced.
Yeah, I'll bet. And you develop, PitFit certainly does, and you're a huge part of it. Obviously, you develop training plans, right? And so you've got them there on site at some point, and you're working with them, 2 or 3 times a week or whatever it happens to be, and then they take off, and you see that heart rate and some of those other things probably while you're working with them. Plus, then you see it in the race vehicle. How much is that heart rate? Do you use that to affect the training plan that you create for them?
Yeah, it's pretty critical. Maybe not necessarily exactly what they're seeing in the car. Our goal usually is to just lower that a little bit. So like I said, they have that reserve at the end of the race to still be just as sharp as they were at the beginning. But what we do here in the facility is we'll train we'll train them to have essentially a higher or a larger operating window. So our goals when somebody comes in here is we want to we want to raise their maximum heart rate, and we want to lower their resting heart rate. So if we can do both of those things, we can expand that window that they have to operate in. And then secondary to that is we want to elevate their or raise their what we call lactate threshold. So the point at which blood lactate begins to accumulate. And the longer we can stay under that while in the race car, the more energy we'll essentially have, that driver will have in reserve. And the farther away from their peak they'll be as they're in the car. Because once they start getting over that point, now they're really burning a lot of energy and they're leaving themselves much, much less in reserve, especially for those, the cognitive based task that driving a race car is.
You said energy, and then you went cognitive there at the end. So there's a physical and a mental, I suppose, right? And so you were talking physical for quite a part of that answer, then cognitive. How much is that? Can you get a driver to become more calm and make better decisions based on the training plan that you are, and understanding the stuff that you just discussed?
Yeah, we certainly can. And it comes down to essentially building, in this particular case, like a larger cognitive capacity. So the more that the more information they can take in and react to and process, then the easier that becomes when they are in the race car. And then you'll see that, less energy expenditure, that lower heart rate and those sort of things. So there is definitely a, psychological aspect to it as well. And some drivers, they'll work with sports psychologists in addition to what they do with us. And but in terms of the cognitive demands, we can certainly train them to be able to handle those more easily, let's say, with less energy expenditure. And we can train that at different levels of fatigue as well. We can train cognitive function when they walk into the gym. We can train it in the middle of the workout. We can train it at the end of the workout. And that way, at every different level of energy expenditure and, what they have left in the tank, they know where their cognitive abilities are going to be.
Is low physical energy and being worn out, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
that directly tied to the mental capacity of a driver towards the end of a race? If you're more tired, you're going to make more mistakes, I
Yeah.
suppose, right?
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. And that's what I was saying earlier, is
Yeah.
essentially the point at which that happens, the point at which those reactions get slower, the decision making isn't as sharp, and even your vision isn't as acute. That all happens before what we call the onset of the feeling of fatigue. So it happens before you know it's happening, and you can literally start losing hundredths of a second without knowing that you are, because you don't feel fatigued yet. You don't feel worn out. So if you ever get out of a car and you are worn out, then you definitely aren't performing as well as you could.
It's
If
a
you get out of the car
it's a
and you don't feel
precursor to
worn
the
out,
mental problems. Yeah,
yeah.
interesting. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and we don't understand that. And then we had we'll uh, we'll maybe throw up the presentation from before. We had a colleague of yours, Dr. Ferguson, was with along with Matt Romanowski. We had a previous webinar, and he talked. We got into quite a bit on the hydration
Mhm.
piece of that. And how does that fit into the two pieces we've talked about here so far, with the physical and the mental and the hydration? Is it just a triangle, or is there many more pieces of it than that, or how important is
Um,
that whole hydration piece?
yeah, I like to consider them all pieces of a puzzle as opposed to necessarily any kind of like triad or something like that. But there's a lot of pieces of that puzzle when it comes to what driver performance looks like. And you know, David, who is much much smarter in this regard than I am, does quite a bit of research on how to maximize that piece of the puzzle. But when it comes to hydration, the biggest thing there is it's so easy to get behind on hydration. Similar to if you start feeling fatigued, that means you're already behind, right? If you start feeling thirsty, you're way behind. And that's another thing that can always be tough to get drivers to understand, is, like, well, I'm not just not that thirsty. It's like, yeah, but you need those electrolytes. You need and in a lot of cases, you need some sugar to make sure that your brain is still functioning at its peak, at where it's optimal. So, physically, obviously, you have a benefit to staying on top of your hydration, but again, the task of driving a race car, being fast, is a cognitive one, and the physical just supports that. So
Ah,
our goal is to always just make sure that the physical is there, and that way it's not holding the cognitive back. And a lot of that, the hydration does the same thing. It benefits both the physical and the cognitive, and you just want to make sure you don't get behind on it.
one of the more extreme things, other than your 24-hour karting record-breaking attempts you've done, is the 24 hours of Daytona, any endurance racing, and 24
Mhm.
hours of Daytona this past weekend. You were down there working with clients, I understand. And what kind of special stuff would you do there, where they're coming in, they do their double or triple stints, and then they're out of the car for
Mhm.
6 or 7 hours? What kind of stuff would you suggest, or did you suggest, with different drivers that were working, that would keep
Yeah.
them in the best shape as possible?
Yeah, every driver tends to have some preferences in terms of what their routine is. But the biggest thing is making sure they get four things. They get food, they get their physio work done, they get hydration, and they get sleep. Those are your four big ones that we need to make sure that are happening in between each stint. And sleep is probably the toughest, especially in that environment. Adrenaline's very high. When even when you do go back to the RV, you can still hear the race going on around you. It's very difficult to tune out. So that's certainly the most difficult. Uh, as long as as long as a driver isn't trying to be stubborn or pushy, the hydration part is actually relatively straightforward. Um, we know how much they should be consuming. We make that up for them. We say, here, drink this, and make sure you drink it all before this time, and there you go. So, assuming each driver is there to try to win, which most of them are, they tend to take that advice and do what they need to do there. And some of them, they have their specific preferences, and we can always work around that. So we have some specific products that we'll use that we've partnered with Infinite to create some driver blends there. But if a driver isn't doesn't like that kind of stuff, we can always substitute it with something else. We even have we had one driver that would just drink water and then have some Celtic sea salt, which was fantastic. It gave him exactly what he needed, and he was one of the drivers that ended up winning the race. So
Interesting.
it was, and he performed very well.
You mentioned physio of one of the four. They've just come off the track and they've been very physical, right? What does that cover? Is there some stretching? Is there massage, or are they truly doing? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so it depends on what their stint looked like, and the feedback that they're providing. But for the most part, it's typically massage if everything's going well. But if there are any issues with, like, over this past race, we had one driver who was quite a bit taller than his two co-drivers and found himself rather scrunched up in the seat. And his after a few laps, his left leg completely went numb. So as a result, we ended up having to do some work in, like, essentially the upper thigh and left glute area, and then provide some what we call kinesio tape, or KT tape, which helps improve blood flow to the area for when he got back in the car again. So once that element of it was done, he felt a lot better, and after his second stint in the car, he had no issues. So it definitely varies what they'll need. It can be anywhere from, like I said, massage to KT tape to some cupping work. I know the physio that we had with Ford Multimatic this past year, she uses like a heated scraper, like a heated fascia scraper, which the guys tended to really like this past year. So again, it just kind of depends on what each individual situation is, how they're feeling in the car, how they feel when they get out of the car. I think we had one driver who didn't even use the physio at all.
that personal preference, right? It is what it
Yeah,
is.
well, he was also the smallest. He was the smallest driver, so he was probably the most comfortable in the car.
Exactly. It's amazing that you started to chat about those things, and my mind goes to, you know, holy cow, there's a whole lot of stuff that's going on behind the scenes of to make this thing work. It's not just the driver gets out of the car, heads back to the motorhome and drinks and eats and takes a nap, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff going on that a lot of
Mhm.
people don't understand. And I have been at a lot of endurance races and the 24 hour. And one of the sleep thing was funny to me because I did actually try to lay down and take a nap one time, and everything. I actually got to sleep pretty well. Then the yellow flag came out, and so the noise was going, and then all of a sudden it went yellow, and that woke me up, right? So it's you can actually get past the noise a little bit, and then the noise stopped, and it was like, oh, what's going on, right? So yeah, it's kind of funny, but the I'd like to mention to the folks that are here watching, we've been throwing some stuff up into the chat. If you have any questions, I see Bruce has a question up there already. If you guys that are here live with us have any questions, make sure that you open up your question and answer box and put them in there. We're going to have a little bit of time, I think, with a couple to get a couple of questions in for Trey before we're finished. The 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 next kind of question that I'd like to get into a little bit, Trey, is how do we gather some of this biometric data and certainly here at AIM we have the ability to connect devices to our AIM data loggers and all of the cars that you worked with in the 24 hour this last past weekend have the same ability, but don't talk about specific data loggers and things, but what kind of sensors are available, what kind of stuff is grabbing data and stuff that you can look at later or even live on the pit box.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The most simple is just a good old-fashioned heart rate monitor. You can get one that's a chest strap or that you wear around your, watch wear around your wrist. Um, and there's a number of those that'll store data and then you download it afterwards. Um, but one of the things that David Ferguson's begun doing recently, like I said, much more ahead of this than I am. He'll have a host of biometrics that he's pulling off of a chest strap, core temp, skin temp, heart rate, things like that. I think you can also look at sweat rate from that as well. But it just connects to a box that then Bluetooths to another box on the CAN bus, and there you go. You've got it within the car's data. Um, Pretty straightforward. We say that now. It didn't wasn't always that straightforward, but now you can simply just Bluetooth whatever you need and pick it up on a CAN bus channel. But there's some other things that we can do as well. They make skin um, like skin-based sweat sensors that can uh, measure sweat rate and composition, which is very useful for knowing how you need to hydrate. And you may have somebody who sweats a lot, but it's very watery sweat. So they may not need as much electrolytes as somebody who could not could sweat much less, but it's very concentrated, what we call salty sweat. And then you may have somebody who sweats a lot and it's salty sweat, and they really need to consume quite a bit of electrolytes throughout the course of a race day or race weekend. So one of those actually is extremely useful. It provides a lot of really good information when it comes to what the hydration needs are of a driver. And it's literally a patch that you just put on your arm, and a sensor slides in, it measures everything, slide it back out, and it'll download straight to an app or something like that. And there's a few different companies that do that sort of thing. Um, and then we actually work with one that will take the data from it and then send it to Infinite, who does our drink solution, and they can make a customized
Oh.
solution based on that, which has been helpful for a couple of our guys, especially in the endurance realm. So yeah, we're essentially looking, we can look at sweat rate, sweat composition, heart rate, skin temp, core temp. I know, again, David's done some things with taking a pill to measure core temperature, and they've actually made that completely metal free. So you can you can take one before a race again. I know it was outlawed for a brief period of time there because it had metal in it, and if the driver was involved in an incident, they couldn't go into an MRI machine as a result. So now they have it metal free and MRI friendly.
Interesting. It's every subject you ever talk about around motorsports and probably anything in life is way more in depth than what you might think at first, right?
Yeah,
And the other piece of what you just said was interesting was I came into this today thinking that we're going to talk about real time heart rate and how that you or the driver might work with the fitness side of it, and you just went to a whole nother level where you that data it gets end up sent to the drink manufacturer. You said the name and I don't recall it now, but they use that to then tailor
Mhm.
fitness materials for each individual driver. That's just interesting to me. What are some of the constraints and limitations? We've talked a little bit about sensors, and by the way, Matt Romanowski from trailbreak.com. If you go to his website, he's got a page that shows some of these different sensors that certainly connect to the AIM devices, and maybe you can get a little bit more information there. But the constraints and limitations, you've everything doesn't just work perfectly, obviously. The what are some things you've ran into that are problems?
I mean, not necessarily problems per se, but just things that you need to consider when you're trying to do something like this. One of them is space, both physical and virtual. Most of the anything real time is going to need to have it's going to need to have like a receiver box or a transmitter box. So there's got to be somewhere to put that. There's got to be space on the data system, an available channel to use to receive this, or in some cases, multiple channels. So it's not so much that you can't do it. It's just you're depending on what unit you're using, you're sacrificing something else to have this information, that sort of thing. So it's all a trade-off here and there. And then some of them can be, a little bit heavy. Obviously, weight is everything in racing. So so far nothing's been outrageously heavy. It hasn't been a big issue. And then also cost.
Yeah.
So if you want to do something like, taking a biometric pill before you go out on the track and transmitting that to to the ECU or to a data logger, then you're looking at spending some money to do that. Whereas if you just want to have a sweat rate sensor on your arm, you can do that for $70 or something like that. So those are just some things that would need to be considered when looking at this kind of stuff.
And we're gonna go through a couple more little things here before we jump in, go back and look at some slides, and we're gonna look at some data that where we're gonna look at heart rate and core temperature and such, and look at a couple of laps and chat about it a little bit. How how far can this go, right? How much of this data is enough? You're talking to a data guy. You're a data guy
Yeah,
from way back, obviously, too. And what always happens to me is if I get to where I think I've got enough data, it just creates more questions and I want more.
yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on how much biometric data is enough?
Well, so I've had these conversations with Dr. Ferguson a few times now, and I've volunteered to be the guinea pig for it. But one of the things that he's been trying to do is actually do brain mapping while in the car. So he's got his brain map cap that you put on, and he's used it on the simulator with drivers, but he wants to be able to use it in the car as well. And one of the constraints that he's run into with that is manufacturers and teams not allowing the driver to wear it, essentially. So finding an appropriate situation to try it out is certainly one of the things that he's had to consider, and that has become a bit of a constraint. But it would be really cool to us if we could essentially see what the brain is doing in real time while a driver is in the car and see how that compares. That's where I think we'll actually, in my um, I theorize or hypothesize that we will see that's where we'll see a bigger difference between a pro and an amateur than in a heart rate trace or something like that, is what the brain activity is. And in I think what we'll see is that the professional driver's brain is much less active than than the amateur driver's brain while they're in the car.
Interesting. The other thing that I
We'll
see
have a way to find out.
yeah, exactly. It'll be interesting. There was a many years ago, and I haven't seen it much lately. Although I've talked to somebody and they said they have seen it. I just haven't. Is there was a way that they could detect where your eyes were actually looking,
Mhm.
and then they became a little bit jittery as the driver either I think it was dehydrated or tired. I don't remember which, but beyond that, just to see where a professional driver is looking and when they look at the apexes and when they look away from it and when they're not looking at
Yeah.
certain things when they're driving, I found to be interesting. Is that a topic that you've looked at all? It's not fitness, but it's would be
Yeah,
interesting.
no, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, eye tracking is definitely a very useful tool, and it can help us as well with training the cognitive side. And again, what you see with those professional drivers is that all of those movements happen much sooner than they do for the amateur driver. They sight they sight things much earlier than the amateur driver does. They're sighting the apex much sooner. They're you know, as they turn in, they're already looking at the exit as opposed to still at the apex, that sort of thing. And all of those
Experience tells
movements,
them, right?
and all those movements happen a lot more quickly too. They're able to process things so much faster. So one of the things we can learn from eye tracking is when a driver checks his or her mirrors, something like that, and how long do the eyes stay fixated on the mirrors. That gives us a really good idea of what the brain processing speed looks like. And you'll see if something like a Formula One driver will spend maybe half the time looking at a mirror that an amateur driver will, or even a pro driver in another series who's not quite as elite as maybe an F1 driver is. So that gives us a really good indication of cognitive capacity and processing speed for sure.
There was something that happened at Daytona this weekend that made me think of that, and it's there was the Global MX5 Cup race that start the second day, and they had a
Uh-huh. Huge ton.
huge
Yeah.
incident on the start, and the a friend of mine who's been a guest here is Todd Burris, and he was in the class, and I think he started 13th, and maybe even a little farther back in the event, and I paused it and slowed it down as they were cleaning it up. I went back, and Todd is a little bit of an older gentleman compared to the probably the average in that class. A lot of experience, tons, and he seen it coming, and he immediately picked a line, and everybody was going super fast. Obviously, it was right at the green, and all together, and he picked the perfect line, and he barely made it through. And I think that there's just some of the drivers that their eyes are picking up things, or their experience levels, and all of that. Not really 100% related to fitness, but that whole eye tracking thing and putting the car where it needs to be is just amazing with some drivers, and some drivers get it right, and some don't, right? And there are trends there with different drivers. It's kind of weird. So the last question I have before we go look at some data and then get to some questions from the folks here is what's next? You've talked, I think, a little bit about it, but what's next in the in-car biometric data world? Where you talked about the brain waves, and we talked a little bit about eyes. Is there anything else that's coming that you can see kind of coming?
Not necessarily different from the items we've discussed. We've got the heart rate, skim temp, core temp, sweat, eye tracking, and brain mapping. I think those would be the direction we're headed. I think what's next is now just finding a better and easier way to integrate it all and make it so that it's not taking up as much, physical and virtual space as it is now, and making it something that can more easily be sent to the pit wall, and something that gets integrated into a team's overall program a lot more.
Interesting. The um, well, there was something I had in my mind there. Oh, in the chat here, you've talked about it at some level, but some of the folks are chatting back and forth about cool suits, and are you watching or seeing most drivers are using these nowadays? And
Yeah,
that's not just a driver comfort thing. That is that mental capacity to be better, right?
right, exactly. Yeah, heat. We break all of our what we call stressors on the driver down into three categories. We have physical stressors, cognitive stressors, and environmental stressors. And that heat level is a huge environmental stressor. Other things that go into that are the noise and the vibration, that sort of thing. But yeah, if you can maintain, if you can cool the driver off, you're gonna have a huge advantage. And we actually have a couple of drivers here in our NASCAR program that they wish they weren't allowed to wear cool suits because they feel like they would have an advantage over other people if everybody was sitting in there roasting. They would be able to manage it a lot better than some of the drivers who don't train nearly as much. So yeah, I think the cool suit technology has actually come so far that it's kind of like one of those driver aids that we don't really want to see because we want to see, you know, raw, unadulterated, no power steering,
Yeah.
no ABS, no traction control. And, that's kind of what a cool suit is. It's all those things, but for the body. And I think, uh, I think that's something that has almost gotten, in my opinion, has almost gotten too good because I do think that there should be a physical challenge aspect to driving a race car, at least at the professional level. You know,
Interesting that the race car drivers will always you got the guys that think they're tougher that way or can handle it
yeah,
better than everybody else. Of course, they're looking for that advantage, right? So they're over there, trying to get them outlawed. It's kind of funny that racers are they're the same in every piece, right? So let me share the screen here again, just so we can jump back in. I know maybe everybody can see that. Let's look at a few screen captures. I think I got four of them, different things, but I thought it would be kind of fun just to look at these as we're kind of closing things out before we get to a couple last minute questions. This is some data. This is some of Matt Romanowski's data. Obviously, it's Watkins Glen, and I just took some screen captures just so we make it a little bit easier than jumping around in different programs. But what we've got here is just the upper one is the green line is the GPS speed. The heart rate is the red one, and then I put in some of the driver inputs just so we could kind of see what the
mhm,
driver was doing when the heart rate was going up and down. And then the map off to the right is colorized, and the closer to red is the higher rate. So yellow is a little bit higher than blue, and then the dark blue would be the lowest spots on the track of what the heart rate is. It's kind of interesting here to see that up the front straightaway started at probably at 120 127 or so, and then and you can see it gets down to a low of 114 113 maybe somewhere in there, and it's rising up and down. I'm going to show a screen here in just a little bit where you can see several laps on top of each other. We can see how consistent this actually is going up and down. Is this kind of typical of what you would see as far as a heart rate for some drivers that you work with?
yeah, that actually is that's very common to see. You'll see the largest heart rate spikes, typically under heavier braking.
Ah,
And then you'll see the largest dips under heavy acceleration. So yeah, that's typically what we do see. And then you'll see that kind of slow taper over the long straightaways, like we're seeing here. And I love actually where you have the cursor stopped, and that is you see heavy braking with that peak in heart rate. And one of the things we found, I know, one of the topics you wanted to talk about with this is, a pro versus an amateur in terms of what we see. And last year, excuse me, or I guess it was 2 years ago now, 2023 at Petit, we had side by side data, and by we I mean David, and he showed me some of it. He had side by side data of an AM LMP2 driver and that person's pro LMP2 driver. And one of the things that we saw was the trace for the pro was shifted to the left just slightly. And we already talked about how there's a little bit of a delay in a heart rate um, trace simply because it has to calculate based on a certain number of data points. It calculates a rate. But the pros trace being shifted to just a little bit earlier in, I guess, in the lap, so to speak, shows that the pro was his physiology was anticipating what was coming more so than the amateur was, where the that physiology was more reactionary. So the pro would have a spike in heart rate either just before or right at the heavy braking, whereas the AMS was just after.
Knew it
And
was
then the
coming
drop,
from experience and from training, right?
exactly, yeah. From
Interesting.
and in this case, honestly, it would be more from experience. Um, and these kinds of things, they ultimately end up getting hardwired into our brains and into our physiology for this sort of thing. So that driver had been driving so much and had known that track so well that not only his brain but his body as well could anticipate what was coming next. Whereas the AM, who was still running decent lap times, this wasn't like it was somebody who had just gotten into a race car for the first time. um, his uh, his biometrics looked like they were more reactionary than the professionals did.
Interesting. Interesting. Let's. This is another slide. It's the same exact data, and it's just 3 laps. And the what I found interesting, and maybe you can comment on a little bit, is the general trends are at the same spots, right?
Mhm.
But there's a red one, there's a blue one, and there's a green one, and it happens to be in order of the laps. The red lap was like lap 6 or something, and then 7 and 8, right, for the green one. But it is pretty interesting that the same things are happening at the same spot on the track, virtually lap after lap after lap.
Mhm. Yeah, there's definitely an element of consistency to it, and I think you see those traces get even closer together the farther in that you get, and the more consistent the driver can be. And then when you get to the point where the driver's getting possibly fatigued, you may see a little bit of a spread again with um, with where everything is happening. A driver can tend to, as they become fatigued, they get less anticipatory, more reactionary. You might see that a little bit in the heart rate trace as well. But I think one of the things that this example here does is it makes a good case for a physical and cognitive warm up before getting into the car. And I would have to look at the lap times for these as well, but I would be willing to bet that lap time was improving through these 3 laps
It was, yep.
also. So one of the things that people don't really think too much of, because you're going to get warm inside a car pretty quickly, um, is doing some sort of physical and cognitive warm up before hopping in. And then you may see these three laps already be a little bit closer together, like you said, lap 6, 7, and 8, or something like that. They could be, ideally we'd want those to be right on top of each other. That's how we're seeing consistency in the driver.
Interesting that you say that. There's been a trend that I have noticed in my time of doing data and watching people and being fairly close to some people, that some people get in the car and they are the ones that I have noticed at least do some warm ups and maybe some mental things. And lap 1 is 2 or 3 seconds better than the next person. That I have some
Mhm.
folks that I work with on data, that's something I'm pushing them on all the time, is that you, their first lap is 2 or 3 seconds off, and then they're within
Mhm.
a second of the leader,
Yeah.
and then lap 3 or 4 or 5 is right with the leaders, but they're already 6 seconds behind, and maybe that's ties into what you just mentioned there as
Yeah.
far as getting mentally and physically ready to go.
Yeah,
Interesting.
absolutely. And we one of the things we stress with our sports car drivers in here is is preparing the brain for that. So we'll even have we'll have workouts here where one of the things that we do is we do a lot of cognitive training, and I may have some of our sports car guys, they'll walk in the door and before they even start warming up, they're onto the cognitive, touchscreen to do some cognitive drills, just so that their brain gets used to needing to fire up on command like that. Because you never know, especially in sports car racing, you never know when you're going to be sitting in the pit box waiting for your stint, and something could happen with the driver in the car, and you've got to put your stuff on real quick. You don't get to do any of your warm up, and you're going out, and it's green flag, and you don't have any time to come up to speed. You can't afford to lose those 6 seconds under green flag conditions. So it's a unique challenge that outside of sports car racing you don't really have to face too much. Everybody's kind of on a level playing field when it comes to that in other forms of racing, but in sports cars you could be hopping out there under green flag and you're immediately racing with somebody who's already been out there for 30 laps and is in a groove.
And boy, if you watched the 24 hours this weekend, if they put new tires on you, you better be on your game when you leave
Yeah,
the pit at night, right?
exactly. Yeah, there were several cars that slid into that
Yeah,
pit lane exit wall with the cold conditions
crazy,
this year. Yeah, absolutely.
crazy. Here's a channels report of the same data. It's just we don't need to chat about it a lot. The growth is happening here, but it's just interesting that another way of looking at your data, to look at your max heart rate, and it actually kind of slowed down on the last lap, and and what we looked at a little bit ago was I think five. Yeah, it's still here, 5, 6, 7, right? And then the last couple laps were a little slower, and you can kind of see things are kind of trailing off a little bit on the heart rate because he did slow down a little bit. But you can see the heart rate going up. There's core temp, and then there's skin temp here, in this way of looking at the data. One more I wanted to show just to kind of get the overall feel. I just zoomed in on the entire on this entire run just to give. Here was the speed. They went out and did a lap and came back in to the pits, checked something, and then went back out. And the and you can see the speeds are pretty much there. That last lap was, you can see there's no big peak on the straightaway, but here you can see the heart rate goes up, and boy, as soon as he came into the pit area, boom, and then something happened there. You got a little asking for tire pressure changes or something, I don't know what, but and then all of a sudden up it went. It kind of peaked here about after about 3 or 4 laps, and was sitting there probably for 4 or 5, and then kind of come down a little bit, and then core temp and skin temp, and I'll have you give me your thoughts on this screen here in just a second. But you can see some dropouts, and Matt talked with you and I before we went live a little bit. But there are some connections and different seat types where it loses the Bluetooth or the wiring connection because of some things, but it comes back, and the general trend, you can see that his core temp was slowly coming up, and certainly the skin temp was coming up as he was working in the car. Is there anything that you see there that is kind of interesting?
Actually, no, that looks pretty normal compared to what we would expect to see inside the car. You'll see if he had stayed out longer, you'd see the core temp kind of level off a little bit. Same with skin temp. They'll kind of, hit their level that they're going to be at, and stay there. And the heart rate, I will say this, this is a relatively calm driver who doesn't get too riled up, it looks like, because having a heart rate under 130 for an entire session is pretty impressive. That's a little bit lower than what we see even from our pretty elite, high fitness guys in here.
Matt's going to be bragging in the chat box here in a moment, but some people in the chat box might say that it's a fairly slow car, but I hate to say that about you, Matt. Sorry about that. Harsh, exactly. So I find it kind of interesting, and if I'm going to slide up to this one here real quick, just for one last little thing, I looked for, and I was not able to find a correlation. I put the steering in here just so we could see, and looked for these oversteer moments. You see this red lap where he had to go quite a ways, opposite lock here, not full opposite lock, but certainly on this lap here, he had to go way down here and catch the car. And the heart rate, while it did go up, and there is a little bit of a delay, but it went up on all of them in that same exact corner. And I thought I would see maybe a little bit more on the blue, but Matt's a cool customer under load when he's about to lose the car here. So I thought that was pretty impressive. So Okay, let me stop the share here real quickly, and let's go through a couple of questions real fast, and then we will jump out. I don't know if you got the questions up or not, but uh,
Yeah.
Bruce has a question about just your background. What situation or thought initiated you go to in this direction? You've always been a fitness guy, obviously, and you've been in motorsports for a long time as well, obviously even before AIM. But what got you to go in this area and work with PitFit?
Yeah.
And you started your own first, and then you've merged with
Right.
them, as I understand it. So,
Yeah.
what got you going?
I'll try to give the short version, but ultimately my whole goal was to be in racing. I loved racing from a very young age, and uh, the path was originally the path was driver. Realized that wasn't going to work out relatively early, and decided then the path was going to be engineer. So I went to school, got my engineering degree, started working for AIM. All was going great, and I ended up taking another engineering job after that. And then while I was there, that was when I decided that it would be fun to try to drive for 24 hours straight and set a world record doing it. So through the process of training for that, I got myself a trainer where I was living. I started to really enjoy that and fall in love with that whole process of training an athlete for peak performance. So then, uh, before I did the actual attempt, I reached out to my now business partner Jim at PitFit, and he offered to help me out a little bit. I went to his facility in Indianapolis and did some training with him over the course of a weekend while I was there for a test. And just through that process, I kept thinking to myself, A, this is really cool. I really love this. And B, I think I could be really good at it. So I looked to see what the certifications were that Jim and his coaches had there. I looked into what it would take to get those certifications, and I told myself, all right, I'm going to study for this. And if I'm still enjoying it and I still like it, I'm going to give it a shot. So I studied for about 2 years to get the appropriate certifications for it, pass the exam, and at right around that time, we needed to make a move, and we moved to Charlotte to so that I could give it a shot, try training drivers. And I worked as an engineer, so I continued my job as an engineer when I got started, and it turned into something that was sustainable on its own. And I found that my passion for it was only growing; it wasn't going away. So I decided to go ahead and make the switch.
Perfect. And boy, it's become a career. It's become a lifelong career now, right? I mean, you're deep into
Yeah,
this. You're super successful, and everybody's proud of what you're doing. And it's pretty cool that you're able to do something that really fits in with what you love. That's pretty cool.
yeah, and like you've said, I've always had a huge fat passion for fitness. Even when I was an engineer, I was always, played a bunch of sports growing up. Loved the training side of it, and when I was able to apply that to racing, it just everything kind of all fell into place and clicked.
Absolutely. Niles, I think we answered both of your questions that you placed in here. I know that question was in there for quite a while, and I think we answered both of yours. Um, the Lippincott asks the question: do you use Z Health in your program? I don't know what Z Health is. You probably do.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is either.
Oh,
We
okay.
we don't. Yeah, we don't.
Yeah, I guess that's a no then, right? Exactly.
Yeah, that's a no. No, we don't use Z Health. I'm actually not 100% sure what that is. Yeah.
Perfect. Let's jump back in, and as we kind of close this down a little bit, um, this video when as soon as we finish, I'll go to work on getting this up on YouTube, and it'll join the gosh almost 270 other videos that we have up on YouTube. So if anybody is interested in taking a look at some of the other stuff we've done, please take a look at that.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
you see the
Roger,
question?
sorry.
See the rest of the
Uh,
question? Okay.
yeah, he had a little bit of a follow up, just giving us some information, and I can tell. He said it's a combo of neurology and musculoskeletal training. What we use, I guess, that would be what we use instead of Z Health is we use a Synaptech sensory station training system that allows us to do almost all of our cognitive training. And we also use a program called Soma NPT, which is a brain endurance training program. So combine those with the physical training that we do, and that I think is the combo of neurology and musculoskeletal training that he's wondering about here. But yeah, we use Synaptech and Soma NPT, and then Synaptech makes some other tools like strobe goggles. And we use a handful of other neurocognitive training accessories with that.
It is a very complex program, right? The entire process is fairly complex and a ton of power. I hope some of the stuff that Trey has chatted with those of you that are watching this live today, or we're going to watch this later as when it's on YouTube, has become valuable. A lot of people don't think about this too much. I think more people are all the time, obviously, and there's a lot of thirst for knowledge on this topic. So hopefully we've given a little bit more for the folks that are want to maybe look into it a little bit deeper. I'll have some contact information for Trey here in just a moment that you'll be able to chat with them if you want even more information. The season is here. We've had several events already. This Trey would look familiar in this screen right here with the customer support side, right? We're
Oh,
out
yeah.
there grabbing providing support to all of our users all over. If you see the guys walking around with their backpacks or in the vans, make sure you give them a tall, cool glass of water, and especially at the hot events. If you don't see them there, they may be there, but drop us a note or give us a call at the 800 number there on the screen, and we'll let you know if there is somebody there, and if it's not, we certainly can help you at the 800 number. The the tons of events have already happened just since the beginning of January that our folks have been at. So it's been a busy year already, and we worked late in the year and through December, and boom, right into January. So it's pretty cool. Those of you that are watching this later on YouTube, as I've said in some other ones before, we talked about a lot of links today. We've talked about some different questions and some other things. All of the stuff that I've mentioned, that there's links in the chat box, the presentation, all of the links to PitFit, all of the stuff that we've talked about will all be in the description of this YouTube video below. So go ahead and jump down there. All the contact information for Trey, all of that stuff will be available. All of their social media sites will all be available down below. So make sure you do that too. Our next webinar, we do these the second Tuesday of every month, and then the last Tuesday of every month. And the second Tuesday, the next one we're going to have is going to be February 11th, and that'll be our evening. The second Tuesday we do later in the time zones, later in the time in the day here in North America. So that'll be at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. We're gonna have David Smith from Kart Speed Solutions join us again. He's done a couple with us in the past, but David has been doing some really cool work with advanced karting data and video analysis, and David's going to come and show us some of the stuff he's been doing. He's been teaching a lot of us some new tricks that he's really working on, that lateral G's and cornering and understanding what the kart is doing, that I think is a direct carryover to anybody that's in anything that needs to be analyzed for corner speeds and corner G's and all the different things that are happening. So hopefully you'll come join us on February 11th. It'll be a good time. Some contact information for Trey and myself if you have a question for me. But Trey is the PitFit Program Director out of Charlotte, PitFit, T. Shannon at PitFit.com. Trey, I appreciate you coming and joining us. It's been great to catch up with you again at that PRI show, and then here today, and to get all your knowledge about some of this stuff. Is there anything else you'd like to kind of share as we kind of close this one down?
No, it's always great to run into you wherever it may be, Roger, and I'm glad you asked me to come on. This was a real pleasure.
We'll probably have you come back here, and as things continue on,
Yeah.
our new Micron 6 now has a dedicated second CAN channel and heart rate monitor channels built into the Micron 6, and when that actually gets out and we're using it and doing it a lot of in the karting world, I'd love to have you come on and review some karting data with us and look at what that thing's outputting and chat a little bit about it there, especially for the karting world. So looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Wouldn't mind being a guinea pig as well if you need it.
If you know what I mean, right? Exactly. I appreciate it, Trey. I appreciate it, Matt, who has been helping in the chat box and putting up the links. I appreciate everybody that came today. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you on February 11th for the next one. I appreciate it, and we'll see you then. Talk to you soon.